Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to Breakfast with Arab. It's great to see you. It's fantastic. There's a full house. I hope you all had an enjoyable break and have returned from the summer suitably refreshed. My name is Farah, and I am the Marketing and Communications Leader for Buildings London. And so to our speaker this morning. Born in the great city of York, Tom excelled at mooching about. He very humbly says that he typically never excelled in anything until, rather surprisingly, he finally settled into working for an architect's practice soon after leaving school. Joining a local architect's firm in Harrogate in 2002, Tom realized he had an interest in modeling and drawing. He developed the fine art of communicating the architect's design. Moving down to London to the Smith Smalley Architects Satellite Office in Mayfair, Tom worked on many different projects, including mixed-use developments and master planning, and including the master plan for Gateshead. Starting work at DLG, who were based in Brick Lane at the time, Tom worked on an array of interesting projects, including the refurbishment of Cornhill at Bank. A week before Tom was about to get married, he was sadly made redundant as the recession had started to bite in 2008. Moving to Jacobs, he carried on working within the architectural team, modelling and creating visualizations, including those for Blackfriars Bridge and an international thermonuclear experimental reactor based in the south of France. Tom was increasingly recognized for his exceptional skills at creating drawings which helped to communicate design, and was invited to work with Jacobs' engineering teams. Moving to Bristol for personal reasons, he drove ambulances for 18 months while studying a degree in psychology. This equipped Tom to subsequently understand how people behave and think. Tom and his wife missed London far too much and came back to the capital. He was interviewed by Arab in 2012, initially joined our infrastructure group, worked within architecture, and then finally found his home with us here in Buildings London. His projects now include working with Crossrail, HS2, Network Rail, and LUL. At present, Tom is predominantly working on HS2 Euston Station design. Tom loves collaborating and facilitating with people from all backgrounds and disciplines. He will start his Masters in Technology and Innovation Management later this month and was recently awarded the ICE's London Technician of the Year. He also sits on the ICE London Committee, and this enables him to have a voice on how the institution should operate. Tom is also heavily involved in Arab's apprenticeship scheme and was central to the refresh and directly responsible for bringing in the first Buildings London digital apprentices. So, without further ado, I'm really very happy to introduce the wonderfully talented Tom Mosser, our man from York, who will share his thinking on the democracy of data and his rather dulcet Yorkshire accent, which I think is actually rather charming. Thank you, everyone.
Wow, what a room. Thank you everybody for coming out this morning so early. And thank you, Farah, for that introduction. I'm regretting being so honest a little bit, but there we are. So, data. In 2006, Clive Humby, a mathematician and the brains behind Tesco's Club Card, coined the soundbite, "Data is the new oil." I'm sure you've all heard it before. And it's a pretty good piece of shorthand to demonstrate the value of data as a commodity. Data is used to power the digital tools of the fourth industrial revolution in a similar way that oil powered the tools of the second and steam powered those of the first. And both data and oil must be refined to be useful. Oil into petrol, data into information. It's interesting as we enter the fourth industrial revolution that in the oil-rich Gulf states, such as Abu Dhabi, and Qatar and Bahrain, that there's been a concerted shift to invest in arts and culture and to create an identity, a new identity for these countries as they transition away from relying purely on oil. Indeed, projects such as the Louvre in Abu Dhabi and the Qatar National Museum in Qatar are case in point at this investment being made to diversify the economy. Personally, I do not think data is the new oil. And I think that thinking about data in the same way as we think about oil is actually holding us back. Firstly, oil is scarce. It's hard to find, it's hard to collect, it's hard to refine, and the reserves are getting smaller every day. It takes a lot of investment to source, to access, to use efficiently, which makes it very valuable unrefined, at least to those who can refine it. In contrast, data is relatively easy to find, it's easy to collect. It's becoming easier every day to refine data. And the reserves are growing exponentially, which means that data, unless it's really private, is almost worthless unrefined. Oil is used once, but data can be used again and again. If I have oil and I give it to you, you have oil, and I don't. But if I have data and I give it to you, we both have data. There's lots of free data around, not so much free oil flowing around. Yet if we add the right data to the right data, we can get exponentially better answers and insight. If we add oil to oil, we just have more oil. Now, I do not think data is the new oil. You can take that away and use it yourselves if you want to. For this talk today, I spent a long time trying to identify a metaphor for data. If oil doesn't quite work, I couldn't settle on one though. And I realised that is because data is unparalleled for its potential to provide insight and enable innovation. To understand the potential of data, we need to understand what it is not. And it is not information. You can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. That's Daniel Keyes Moran, an American programmer and science fiction writer. The difference between data and information is simple, and yet these two terms are often confused. Data is raw, facts, figures, numbers, text, images. Information is the data that has been refined, interpreted, made into something meaningful. Let's take a look at data for a second, or 60 seconds, because in the next 60 seconds, 150 million emails will be sent, 3.3 million Facebook posts will be made, 3.8 million Google searches undertaken, 65,000 photos uploaded to Instagram, 450,000 tweets tweeted, and 500 hours of video uploaded to YouTube, including this, hopefully, as well. By 2020, it's estimated that 1.7 megabytes of new data will be created every second by every person globally, or about 770 petabytes per minute. 1 petabyte is 1,000 terabytes, by the way. Today, less than 0.5% of available data is actually being analysed. The data that we have is growing quicker than the skills we need to refine it. So the quantum of data is immense. It's not a scarce resource like oil. And yet, because the oil comparison persists, many people seem to think that they've got their own personal data well, which they need to safeguard and protect as though they'd found an oil well in their back garden. The industry seems to have shortcutted to this idea that data is IP and everyone should keep a tight hold of their data. Yet the data itself isn't IP. And most of the time, data is worthless without being refined. It's what you do with that data and how you turn that data into information, which is the IP. John Perry Barlow, an American essayist, has this view. I personally think intellectual property is an oxymoron. Physical objects have a completely different natural economy than intellectual goods. It's a tricky thing to try to own something that remains in your possession even after you give it away to many others. I said earlier, if I have oil and I give it to you, you have oil and I don't. Yet if I have data and I give it to you, we both have data. I was actually misquoting a George Bernard Shaw quote I like. If two men each give one another an apple, they still each have only one apple. But if each of them gives the other an idea, they each have two ideas. This mindset challenges our understanding that data is a thing that should be possessed and protected in the same way we possess and protect a physical item. One of the assumptions I'm questioning on a current project is what IP is and what it isn't. What is expected to be shared? What is expected to be kept? And what is reasonable for a client to pay for and what isn't? When does a tool become a service? And when does a service become an area of expertise? What I'm seeing is that while we're being encouraged to innovate, expected even, often the IP clauses in our contracts are either all-encompassing or rather vague. And this can be counterproductive if we're not having open and honest conversations with our clients and our collaborators to seek clarity. The danger of over-optimistic IP clauses, coupled with the general misunderstanding around what is and what isn't IP, can lead to individuals holding back on ideas that would add value to the project because they're afraid they'll have to give them away or hand them over, which actually, more often than not, isn't the case. The lesson I'm taking away is that although the issue of IP is usually looked at from a contractual, legal, or occasionally technological perspective, it's often a cultural problem, which is reinforced through conversations underpinned by simple misunderstandings. We need to better understand IP. I would even go as far as saying that as an industry, we need to redefine how we procure innovation. One of the things that could provide an alternative to current IP law is free and open source software. So open source, denoting software for which the original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed and modified. Now, the open source movement began modestly as a response to extensive use of IP law to protect the source code of computer programs. One of the most famous pieces of free and open source software is the operating system Linux. Linux was created in 1991 by a 21-year-old University of Helsinki student named Linus Torvalds, this guy here, who was frustrated by the licensing restrictions of other operating systems. Now, some of us in this room might not be very aware of Linux, as it has a very small share of the desktop computer market, around 1.8%, compared to the Goliath Microsoft Windows at almost 90%, and Apple Mac OS coming in just under 9%. What most people don't realise is how popular this free and open software is away from our desktop computers. For example, Linux underpins the operating system Android, which is used on 80% of all smartphones and 60% of the world's tablets. Linux is also the platform of choice for the film industry. It's 95% market share for large animation and visual effects studios. More than 95% of the world's web servers run on variants of Linux. And Linux almost has a monopoly on space travel. NASA uses Linux on its Mars rovers and its satellites. SpaceX uses Linux on its Falcon 9 rockets. In other words, this one piece of free and open software, or software based upon it, is the OS on almost every computer globally except desktops. The Linux license requires that anyone who distributes software based on its source code must make the originating source code and any modifications available to the recipient under the same terms. Use, improve, and share. People like to quote Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, but today I'd like to quote Linus Torvalds. He says, "I often compare open source to science. Science took this notion of developing ideas in the open and improving on other people's ideas and making it into what science is today and the incredible advances that we have had. The scientific tradition is that you share ideas and other people will test them and they might improve upon them, and through that advancement everyone benefits." Jim Whitehurst, CEO at Red Hat and previously COO at Delta Airlines, puts it another way. Open source isn't about saving money. It's about doing more stuff and getting incremental innovation with the finite budget that you have. If we know what data is, and we know what information is, the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. That was Carly Fiorina, former executive president and chair of Hewlett-Packard. And that goal, to turn information into insight, is the big test for everyone. We've all heard about the power of big data to revolutionise our lives and our industry, but where's the evidence? Many industries have loudly proclaimed their success with big data. From finance, combining mathematical models with historical and real-time events data, and even social media trends to make smarter investments, to the manufacturing sector, optimising processes, streamlining quality assurance and preventative maintenance. Next on the horizon is the healthcare industry. Being able to diagnose patients more quickly, improve the efficiency of hospitals, or even find new cures, are all being touted as potential benefits of big data. It won't surprise you to hear that it was only last week on Radio 4 that it was being talked about that the NHS's lack of investment in IT may actually prevent it from making the most of this progress. Or maybe it could be that those industries are just good at talking big. As Dan Airley, Professor of Psychology and Behavioural Economics at Duke put it, big data is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it, no one really knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims that they're doing it. Yet we can't compare ourselves to other industries or use data in the same way. How many times have we seen the construction industry compared to the car industry? What these comparisons lack is a full understanding of the complexity and local nature of construction. Our industry still relies on traditional materials and lots of hard-learnt traditional skills. Even the biggest firms do not deploy their entire workforce to a project. Our projects are made up of subcontractors and consultants, experts in certain areas and certain skills. The team that's most local to the project, or the one most willing to travel, even the one with the lowest bid. The data within the built environment sector must be the most siloed and disparate of any industry in the world. Therefore, a one-size-fits-all approach to using data and information used by finance or e-commerce is ill-suited to construction. The reason that finance and marketing, aviation, insurance have all realised massive gains through analysing their data is because they generally handle a large quantity of their data through a small number of systems. This means that they can apply the same structure to their data, making it easier for them to process. Now, every project I work on has a large number of different types of systems in place, for creating and capturing data. And that's just one project. Each separate project has different collaborators and different requirements, resulting in a larger number and wider range of systems. I'm currently working with a client to develop an asset strategy. Although this asset data will be generated using BIM processes and proprietary tools, the data will be held within a completely software-agnostic database. Accessed via a web browser, any part of the design team will be able to feed in data. Now, this isn't about creating a virtual twin of the building limited by a 3D model, more creating a database that can be dynamically built upon during the future operational life of the project. And with, for example, the growth of connected wearable devices expected to triple between 2015 and 2020, the building users themselves will create real-time data, in addition to data generated from sensors embedded in the building and the equipment itself, creating a pool of performance data that could augment the asset management system. While we're starting to see examples of this happening, it's on a small scale for FM and operations. The next step is to see this performance data to make it back into the planning, design and construction phases of the project in time to positively affect the decision-making process. Even where systems are the same or good practice is used for information management, the data often remains hidden away. We spend an awful lot of time creating data in this industry. It costs a lot of money, it's almost always bespoke. Then we use it once and we save it away in a drawer, often forgetting that we have the data in the first place. We recently worked with an airport that asked us to design a new short stay car park, as the high number of waiting traffic was causing congestion. By studying flight data, we were able to determine that the peak traffic was linked to a number of inbound flights from certain locations in the world. The passengers on these flights tended to be met by a large number of extended family, each bringing their own cars. As it happened, a number of these flights were scheduled to land within a similar time frame, exacerbating the problem. By analysing the data and understanding the drivers, we could suggest a solution. The airport could work with the airlines to stagger these particular flights, reducing the congestion to a manageable level and thereby mitigating the need for an additional car park. The big test will be, will this data be put back in the drawer, or will it continue to be used to help inform opinion when further projects are suggested? The point is that refining the data is the important part, because that is the part where we bring a little bit of ourselves to the process. That's where we can make the invisible visible. And yes, we bring with us bias and perceived wisdoms, but we can also bring fresh perspectives. There is a quote by former Netscape chief exec Jim Barksdale: "If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine." That is a nice, funny little soundbite. Yet the problem with it is that it negates people's experience. We don't have to make a choice between data and opinions. A lot of people talk about data-led strategies, but this can be dangerous. Data does have a part to play in helping people arrive at a decision once it's been refined, but data can never reflect the totality of what has occurred or what is occurring. And an analysis of data can never deliver a certain prediction of the future. In the words of Ronald Coase, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, "Torture the data and it will confess to anything." If we can use the data refining process as an opportunity to see a problem with fresh eyes, as an opportunity to collaborate with our peers and test our own understanding, we'll get much deeper insight than simply relying on the data itself to give us some miraculous answer to our problems. A fresh perspective is important. Isaac Asimov is probably best known for being a science fiction author and creator of the 3 laws of robotics. Interestingly, he was also a professor of biochemistry at Boston University, and he understood the benefits of a fresh perspective saying, "A knotty puzzle may hold a scientist up for a century, when it may be that a colleague has the solution already and is not even aware of the puzzle that it might solve." Venture capitalists, Shasta Ventures, ran an analysis of 32 billion-dollar companies, including Uber, Twitter and Dropbox. What they found was that 3 out of 4 of the companies were built and run by people who were doing it for the first time. They didn't have deep experience in their field, but they were passionate about their product and they had a unique perspective on how to serve their target customer. Having a fresh perspective is important, as people with industry experience are often constrained by what is not possible or why it won't work. Simply, we get stuck in knowing what we know. Max Planck, the Nobel Prize-winning German theoretical physicist, famously said, "Science advances one funeral at a time." Every area of expertise is the same. Yet innovation benefits from a fresh perspective. Our industry is no different. Collaboration is about breaking down silos and sharing ideas. What if we treated data in the same way? Imagine a world where we didn't hoard data as though it were oil. What if we were to treat data in the same way we treat our ideas when we're collaborating? If we ignore the private and security or financially sensitive for a moment, what would be the impact of us giving our data away? A pool, a lake, an ocean of data available for anyone to interrogate, investigate, and positively use. What would happen? Well, I don't think it would take too long for there to be a number of startups down around the Silicon Roundabout in Shoreditch, bringing new skills and new perspectives and providing new insight into our industry. Or maybe the insight would come from someone in this room or someone else in the industry. What's the alternative? Well, we could keep treating raw data like oil, treating it as though it is something valuable in and of itself. Well, then nobody wins. Because unrefined data is just words and numbers. And for the insight it can facilitate to be made visible, it needs to be reviewed and refined. In a world where just 29% of businesses are gaining insight from raw data, what we need to do is change our view of data. Data is not oil. One final assumption I'd like to challenge is that people don't want to share their data. Actually, we share our data all the time. And we do it because it's a trade. We get to use useful apps on our phones. We get to use powerful tools for free. We get to benefit from tailored services. And the trade-off is data. The truism, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, acknowledges our willingness to trade something of ourselves for better products and services and insight. Why can that not be true for the built environment? What any data sharing initiative should not be is another commercial enterprise. We're in a low margin game already, and any thought of extra costs will put the majority of people off the idea. We only need to look to the slow adoption of BIM to see that it doesn't matter how many benefits are being offered, the perceived extra cost will stop people from committing. Imagine a world where we have a built environment data institute, where for a fee you could access vast swathes of relevant data that could help you make more informed decisions, gain better insight, and learn from other people's problems and successes. And what if that fee could be a commitment to provide your own data, meaning that it wouldn't only be the biggest that could afford to drink from the well. Then we could truly democratize data. And through this approach, open up our industry to new ideas, bringing fresh perspectives. We have to recognize that such an approach wouldn't be easy. And we know there will be problems with private data, secure data, personal, financial, business critical, questions on data quality, costs of gathering structured data, costs of infrastructure. Yet, if we free the data, make the invisible visible, we might just gain the insights that help all of our industry move forward. If we can empower the industry to have more confidence to share and test and challenge, maybe we can all come away with new wisdoms, with new insight, and with new perspectives on the challenges we face. So I say, free your data. Allow your data to be challenged and make the invisible visible. Thank you. Questions? Yes. No, brilliant. Thank you. Excellent. Right, I'll be. Yeah.
Just an observation first, because as professionals, one of the definitions of professional is that you can be sued. Because you're saying on my letterhead that I'm an architect and I can be sued for something that I present. When you're sharing this amazing new ocean that you want to create, let's say kind of parallel to the Linux model. By the way, wonderful talk, before I say anything else. Our industry is full of silos, and some are better at breaking it down. How do you actually start to deal with liability?
I have absolutely no idea, and that's the. I think we need to be open and honest about that, because it's the stumbling block that everyone comes up against first, and we need to be talking about it more openly and trying to work out if the benefits of sharing would outweigh any risks and what we can do to try and mitigate those risks. Because I don't have an answer, and I wish I did. And I'd love to hear if there's any answers in the room on that, because that's the key thing, is people's fear of that will be the biggest blocker. Yes, Carl.
Hi, Sam. Thank you for a really good talk. That was very enlightening, very impressive.
Thank you.
I work at CIPSI, and we are actually looking at the data and information that we hold. We're actually looking at exactly the topics that you're talking about, and in reference to the comment you made just now. If the data is filtered through a professional institution, would the worry of liability be materially reduced?
That's a really interesting point. I don't know. I think that's something that, as institutions, I'm a member of the IC, the institutions should be working together to have those conversations, because they affect all of our professionals effectively. Yeah.
We also, I was very interested to see your taking data to information, and then also the reference from information to insight. We have gone a slightly different way. We've gone from information to knowledge, and knowledge being the human interpretation of the information.
Yeah.
One of the comments that you made was about the torturing of data.
Yes.
Our industry is very homogenous, can I put it politely, as it's mostly white blokes. Would our industry benefit from reducing that homogeneity?
Completely. The diversity of thinking that sharing would bring, and the new perspectives, is exactly what I'm trying to touch upon. Yeah. Yes.
A great presentation and some really good, nice sound bites as well. Talking about data, it's also about what kind of data we're looking at. So construction industry has almost all the information in Excel sheets. So it's also about how you collect in silos you were talking about. What about process data? Now companies collect a lot of process data, but then that's what gives them competitive advantage.
Yeah.
If you want to improve productivity, you need to analyze that. And talking about your data institute, how can a company be assured that even if I share process data, I'm not going to lose my competitive advantage?
I suppose my first thought to that, and I think it's a really good question, is that if we did have an ocean of information, is that any one individual company's advantage would be diluted, and that you'd only be able to see trends from that, rather than any specifics that could identify something that could be used by a competitor as something specific to give for them to steal your competitive advantage. That would be my thought. Yes.
Say this ideal state happens, all the data is shared and it's readily available for everyone to use and pick up. The challenge still seems to be how to fuse that together and come together and effectively collaborate effectively together. At the moment, there's so many silos in construction and it exists that way. Why would it be any different in the future? And how would collaborative process, it's an area we work on, create the method to inspire and bring multiple parties together to work effectively, and then you've got quite an inspirational product.
Yeah, this would be enabled through technology, but it's not technology that will make people do it, as we know. Well, we can share loads of information now. Doesn't mean we do. It's about how we act as professionals and about that desire to share, and it has to be from the bottom up. I think it has to be people wanting to talk to their peers and collaborators to try and bring things together.
Yeah. So the desire to share is all very well and good, but it'll only create a product if teams and multiple groups can operate together really effectively. And that seems to be quite a core, really interesting area.
Yeah. I don't think this would be a product. In my mind, it would be a resource. Yes. So how different individuals or groups or people would use that, I don't know. I think that's what we'd be looking to see, how people did use it, because we wouldn't want to be trying to tell them. Yeah.
Hi, Ben Stubbs from UCL.
Hi.
In your opinion, how vulnerable is our data to malign activity, and do you foresee a data Armageddon?
How vulnerable? Pretty vulnerable. And do I see a data Armageddon? No. You can quote me on that. Quote me on that one. No. No, it's a really interesting question. What are your thoughts?
We hear a lot about it at the moment.
Yeah, we do.
In particular, it's very current, and we're aware, particularly on the political scene, of the manipulation of data. So I'm kind of interested on the industrial level, how vulnerable what we're producing is.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting exercise for air conditioning manufacturers to purposefully spike the data to throw everybody else off. I don't know what we could try and do. We're a pretty safe bet, construction industry. I don't think we could impact too many political, sociological. I don't know. It's a really good question. I'll have a think about it and get back to you.
Well, I think it's. Tom was absolutely on the button. Our industry is suffering from divide and conquer. We're in too many silos. So his insights in how we can actually innovate, improve, enhance, also to protect, the things that we do in terms of quality and delivery. So I'm totally with Tom's thinking. I mean, in order to be able to share data, and the question really comes into my mind is, what data do we share? Because if it's data about the process of designing and building, I think that actually is already happening to some extent. But sharing of data which is commercially sensitive, the obvious one, which is access to clients and who pays and how much, that is quite sensitive, and how we navigate that. The one thing I would really like the data sharing is actually the remuneration that we are enhanced as architects, engineers and other built environment experts, and how we share that data and how it's protected so we can actually deliver the service that we really need to.
Well, at the moment, we're in quite an interesting sort of time within lighting, and the ability to harvest so much data through the use of Li-Fi and connected luminaires. So passing information to people's phones, but also taking information from your phone to help map people. I guess it's all about harvesting this data, but not everybody knows what they're going to do with it. So some people are quite scared about being tracked around supermarkets, and it's purely used as a marketing tool to push, I guess, adverts to you, whether you want to receive them or not. So from that point of view, it's quite an interesting time within the lighting industry. I mean, when it comes to to data since the dawn of time. Some people have been very keen to share their research, and the other people are very, very secretive about it. I think it's obviously important that we do share this data, and the issues that people have are sort of disbanded, and I think only good can come from this sharing of this, because people are able to learn from this, and it's just going to maximise productivity and lead to a better world, I guess, in theory.
Yeah, Tom's talk gave me a lot of food for thought. I'm an architect, but I also write code. And about 5 years ago, I was involved in a project in central Italy where we worked with Google to crowdsource the 3D modelling of a city that had been hit by a major earthquake. And since then, we've been looking at ways in which we can try to move things forward, because when you cover a disaster, obviously the focus is on disaster recovery, and 5 years further down the line, we're now interested in how can we use the data we gathered to actually do something worthwhile for the people in the city. So over the next year or so, what we're aiming to do is to pull together different sources of, I would say information rather than data, by the way, but different sources of information about work that's been done in the city in reconstruction, about the historic documentation of the buildings, so that when you actually visit the city as a tourist, you can have direct access into that, so you can look at a building and then pull up geolocated information on its original history, what's been done to it. And beyond that, the thing which really interests me is that if you're living in a city which has been subject to a natural disaster, there's clearly an issue of understanding risks in relation to disaster. So the bigger aim is to get good insight as inhabitants in the city as to the risks associated with where you live, where you work, and where you go to school, so that people can actually plan ahead and understand the risks associated with future disaster. And I find it absolutely fascinating that the building industry is actually starting to look sensibly at how we use data and information. And for me, the sort of take home from it is creating a movement towards greater sharing of information. I think he made the distinction between data and information. And for me, the reality is that we should be sharing information, because that's where it becomes useful. And then you can get greater insights out of that. So, yeah, I thought it was fascinating.